dear learners on the platform of MOOCs. I am Professor Nafis Ahmed Ansari from Department of Political Science of Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. Now we will try to understand about the role of bureaucracy in administration. The administration of the policies that the government has defined is the primary and most important functions that the bureaucracy is responsible for. The statute supplies the Council of Ministers with fundamental framework and policy frameworks that it needs to function. In the steps that is necessary, the bureaucracy is responsible for carrying out the policies implementations. This load that has been imposed upon the bureaucracy is not only novel but it also quite important. The ancient functions of the law and order management and income collection continues to exist in the same manner as they did before. The process of greater acceleration is not just contemporary but also significantly more than the roles and the duties that were previously in place. The term civil service is used to stress the distinction between its apparatus and the services provided by the military. In order to provide assistance to the ministers in the process of creating policies and enforcing these policies, the government has appointed officers who are both highly trained and experienced and who work as permanent employee. It is the elected representative and the minister who are in command of the government in a democratic system, and the administration is subject to the oversight and regulations of these individual representatives. It is not possible for the administrative officials to interpret in a manner that is contrary to the policy made by the assembly. The ministers are the ones who are accountable for maintaining political control over the administration through their actions. In real sense, the administrative machinery in India has proved its professionalism. At the same time, its apparatus is elevated to the level of political liability. In accordance with the expectations that it will maintain a political neutrality, the bureaucracy will not take any political stance on significant policy issues. The Prime Minister, the Council of Ministers, and a huge committee known as the bureaucracy are the administrative machineries, are all members of administrative organization of governance. The bureaucracy in India has the significant and challenging duty of transforming a developing state into a functioning one. This is due to the fact that India is developing country. It is necessary for bureaucracy to fulfill this function in economies that have grown. In light of the fact that it is not an easy task to develop a nation in a short amount of time and with a limited amount of resources, bureaucracy in India confronts challenging tasks and bears the enormous burden of development. In addition to the major function that bureaucracy plays in the development of the nation, the Indian bureaucracy also plays a number of other vital roles related to development of nations. A list can be a long, but we try to understand these areas also. The management of administration, one of the most important functions of a bureaucracy, is to ensure that administration is operating without any disruptions and in accordance with the rules and regulations and that have been enacted by the government. This is something that we have previously addressed in the previous lectures. Advisors to executives in political positions as far as concerned, when it comes to make decisions that are beneficial to the government, bureaucracy provide advice to political leaders which in turn helps to ensure the government operates efficiently. Considering that the political executives are not familiar with the operations of the government, these bureaucrats have the responsibility of guiding them through decision making process. Bureaucracy has an indirect part in the process of lawmaking since it is responsible for drafting the bills that are presented to the legislature for purpose of enacting a law, for the purpose of making a law. The ministers make contact with the civil servants in order to obtain all the informations that civil officials are required to provide to the legislation in order for the bill to be passed. When it comes to policy formulations, it is necessary to incorporate the policies that are developed into certain circumstances in order for them to put into effect. Political executives are responsible for carrying out these functions. Bureaucracy, on the other hand, plays a significant part in the entire process of policy making. As we have seen above, the civil servants or bureaucrats play a significant role in directing these political executives in their functions. Bureaucrats are responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of the government records. They do this by collecting and classifying informations regarding activities carried out by the government. During the time that the India was under the British colonial rule, the bureaucracies, also known as the civil service system, existed. With the passage of the Government of India Act in 1858, the British were able to exercise full control over the government of India. At this point, the British Empire established its authority over India by means of commissioning is consisting of improved specialists, a competent administration that was primarily made up of Indians who had pledged their allegiance to the British government was established by the British in the period of time that was rather less than a century. There is a strong possibility that this administrative body could have characterized as the indispensable component of British rule in India. After India gained independence and during a time when countries in the third world were working to develop professional services that were skilled and competent, the highest level of bureaucracy in India took a resolute and distinctive stance. It gave India with autonomy and continuity, which has remained unshaken even throughout the period of political instability and weak political control at the national and state levels. It continues to supply India with these things. According to the following, the names bureaucracy originated from the French word bureau, which means small desk, to the Greek words criterion, which means to rule. On the other hand, bureaucracy is essential, synonymous with a office based governance. A German sociologist named Max Weber was the one of the first people to modern times to critically study bureaucracy. He was the one of the pioneers in the field as a means for sensible arranging a complex company. He characterized the concept as such. In bureaucracy, it is necessary to coordinate the efforts of the vast number of the people who are required to collaborate with one another. In the context governance, the phrase bureaucracy refers to government by offices. In order to ensure that the laws that has been adopted by elected authorities are successfully carried out, bureaucracy are responsible for assigning government policies. In the executive arm of the government, these individuals are permanent members of the professional staffs. The major job of these personnel is to provide assistance to the functioning of government agencies, despite the fact that they report to the ministries. There are permanent positions in government offices that are reserved for civil servants. They frequently participate in their administration when they are still young and continue to work for the government until they reach at the age of retirement, which is normally 60s and onwards. What is the role of the bureaucracy when we try to trace? Then we find that there is a common perception that the term bureaucracy or bureaucratic or bureaucrats or the bureaucrats are associated with the negative concepts. Employees of the governments are known as the bureaucrats, and the word bureaucrats implies that it is more important to adhere to the established rules than to maximize efficiency. On the other hand, if there is a perspective that is more objective and regarding bureaucracy. It is appropriate to offer comment on the administrative process. It frequently coincides with the absurdity, inefficiency, and redundant behavior. The phrase politicizing the imaginable is common example of a statical portrayal of bureaucracy. It is the urge to govern business through closed channels that is the drive force behind bureaucracy. For purpose of preserving order, closed systems are formal and stringent. It is essential for bureaucracy to adhere to precise procedures. There is a possibility that the greatest distinguishing characteristics of a bureaucracy is its reliance on hierarchical processes to either simplify or replace independent decision making. The bureaucracy formulates hypotheses about an organization and the environment in which it operates. An example for such assumption is that the organization cannot continue to function by relying on an open operating system that is either overly or complex or prone to unpredictability. What should be done instead is to develop and continue to maintain an updated system that is a logical closed. In contrast to the administration, bureaucracy, when we try to see, we find that the term government and administration, the phrase bureaucracy does not mean the same things. In contrast to the fact that many bureaucracy operates independently of administrative structures. Certain administrative organizations do not fall within the category of bureaucracy. Differences lie in the objectives of the various systems. In administration is when we talk is responsible for directing the resources of an organization toward a certain objective, such as the administration of services or the development of the profits. The implementation of protocol is a guarantee that the bureaucracy provides, regardless of the conditions or the goals. Countries that are considered to be modern industrial nations, such as the United States of America, typically have a dual bureaucracies that consist of private companies and the government regulatory bodies. Wherever there is a regulatory bureaucracy, there is a responsible for enforcing restrictions on economic activity. A private corporation may establish one in order to avoid violating such laws. There is a challenge to the assertion that the individual players are important when the bureaucracies are involved. When translated literally, the phrase bureaucracy means rule by desk. The goal of institutions is to design, adopt, and enforce public policy in a manner that is both efficient and equitable. It is an institution that is hierarchical in character. There is a high probability that the bureaucracy have the most unfavorable reputations among all the governmental structures. Some of the phrases that have been used to describe their roles and operations include red tape, middleless rules, impersonal, and slow moving. Inside of the bureaucracy, there are two primary conundrums. The first, the problem is determining whether or not bureaucrats should have the ability to make their own decisions or should be directly answerable to their political masters. The second conundrum concerns the responsibility of bureaucrats to adhere to the predetermined rule regulations as well as the extent of the scope they may have to identify appropriately answer for situations that have not been anticipated in advance. In today's modern society, some of the critics have claimed that the bureaucracies are essential to the functioning of society. Max Weber, a German sociologist who lived in 1864 until 1920, proposed that bureaucracy is the most rational and effective way in which human activity can be organized. He also stated that systematic processes and are the essentials in the order to preserve order, to optimize efficiencies, and to minimize favoritism. On the other hand, Weber also saw unconstrained bureaucracy as a threat to the human freedom, with the potential of locking individuals in an impersonal iron cage of rule based logical control. Inside of the bureaucracy, there are two primary conundrums that we have seen above. Now, the bureaucracy in policy formulation is concerned due to the fact that the policy process involves the identification of policy problems and policy agendas. Bureaucracy plays a significant role in the correct articulations of molding of the policies. When it comes to the regulations that govern the day to day operations of public affairs, civil officials are required to bring a fresh perspective to the table. In addition to their role in the actual implementation of policies, civil servants have a significant amount of inputs to offer. In the process of formulating public policies, bureaucracy plays a function that is analytical, proactive, and informing. It is a common misconception that the only people who are genuinely involved in policy advice, policy formulation, and policy monitoring are the highest ranking officials, who include the heads of the state agencies and their immediate subordinates, also known as top highest ranks. To put into practice, however, the individuals who currently hold the positions of ranks 3 or 4 from the top, also known as the middle ranks, are actively involved both in the formulation and implementation of the policies. It is typical that incumbents of the middle ranks who are responsible for the actual drafting of the bills and proposed amendments to existing legislations, the compilations of white papers, the communication to their superiors regarding whether or not the implementation of the existing policy satisfies the requirements that have been laid out, and suggestions of alternative strategies that need to be followed. When it comes to the policy formulation, innovations, monitoring, and guidance, they are actively involved in all these activities. Especially if they are to have direct access to the minister, middle level officials may have a greater or lesser impact on the making of public policy depending on the leadership management style of the ministers, the political sensitivity of the issue at hand, and the acceptance level of the heads of the department. This is especially true if they are to have direct access to the ministers. Instances in which the minister bypasses the head of the department in order to hold consultations directly with the middle level bureaucrats or request that they report directly to him demonstrate an increase in the participation of these individuals in the process of policy formulation. Under normal circumstances, this position does not come up, and all the policy ideas made by the bureaucrats are the middle level and are examined by the high ranking bureaucrats who may accept them with or without modifications, or they may send back to the middle level for modifications, adjustments, clarifications, a specific or an explanation memorandum on this matter. The minister may use this memorandum when they making a decision regarding the policy. The situation in which the top level officials who are supposed to have the ability to establish official policy because of the post they occupy might do little more than legitimate the policy suggestions that are formulated at the middle level of the hierarchy. That is quite probable. It is quite possible that the situation could occur before submitting the proposals to the ministers who is concerned they would, if necessary, make only minor adjustments to the proposals that was presented to them. Additionally, they would occasionally make a selections between the alternative courses of actions that were proposed by their subordinates, who are frequently responsible for the actual task of acquiring and interpreting informations, as well as for framing proposals in acceptance terms. When it comes to the formulation of public policy, the highest level of the bureaucracy plays a considerable role. The notions that top bureaucrats just act as a type of cleaning houses between the ministers and the middle level bureaucrats is not something that should make it its way into being. That is not even close to being the case. It is true that the top level bureaucrats have direct contact with the ministers. However, their role is to challenge the proposals that are presented to them by subordinates, to add their own knowledge and insight to the proposals, and most importantly, to ensure that the proposals that are ultimately presented to the ministers have taken into consideration the policy of the government that is in the power at the time. It is also necessary for the highest level of the bureaucracy to investigate whether or not the proposed policy is politically feasible, as well as whether or not the recommendations are feasible in terms of the economic reasons. They are also required to determine the resources that are already available, the availability of the people, and the administrative practicability of the situations, which means that they must accurately measure the boundaries of what is feasible and acceptable. In many cases, people have the misconception that the anticipated level of expertise is that of a bureaucrat, where the minister need to exercise discretion. If the functions of the top level bureaucrats that are mentioned earlier are taken into consideration, then it also expect to him to exercise judiciousness when dealing with proposals that are to be presented to the minister. However, it is important to note that judiciousness is to be demonstrated within the parameters that have been established by the policy of the government that is in power at the time. Despite the fact the ministers and bureaucrats are responsible for formulating policy, bureaucrats who are impartial are not required to have a significant amount of input. They work for the government, not for the party, and is not in power. Therefore, the political executive, regardless of the party, they belongs to able to rely on the professionals working in the civil services. However, civil officials and bureaucrats have their own perspective on what is significant for the department and country. Therefore, in light of the fact that they are unable to operate independently, it is necessary to look for strong ministerial leadership. Officials have a negative opinions of political leaders who are unable to wield influence. Whenever minister demonstrate a strong dedications to a particular policy, particularly one that is supported by the ideology of a party, the influence of the bureaucracy is significantly diminished. When we conclude this discussion, we can say that it is possible for bureaucracy to assist corporations in operating smoothly and effectively. Because of this, the major firms are able to streamline their process and provide order to procedures and computer systems. Both management and processes become less chaotic as a result of the progressions. There is typically a division of labor inside the bureaucracy with jobs that are not ambiguously defined. Thank you.